once you control for intelligence, the big predictor of fertility, intelligence is like 80% genetic. Once you control for intelligence, the big predictor of fertility is conservatism, maybe 60%, 50% genetic, and religiosity, which is up to 70% genetic. And so they become the surviving population. The population renders itself healthy again. In addition, what these left-wing people push for is the collapse of society. They are, by encouraging intelligent women to suppress their fertility, by having massive welfare programs to help low IQ people have kids, they're forcing down the intelligence of society. They're collapsing society back to a harsher level, under which people like them will die.
Hello, welcome back to Psychobabble, where we expose bad therapy and the liberal narratives that contribute to our poor mental health. I'm Hannah Spear. It's great to be back with you. Today I'm joined by Professor Edward Dutton. He's a British anthropologist, and he has a YouTube channel very popular called The Jolly Heretic, which I will link below. And he's written multiple books. He spent his career looking at the ways religion and cultural and human evolution shape each other. He's known for being very brave, bold, and talking about controversial topics like intelligence. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Good to see you again. I did an interview with you quite a while ago, and we're just publishing it today. Today. So I wanted to wait until it was topical, and all of these crazy women getting themselves arrested for saying they support Palestine action in the UK, and sitting there with placards saying "Arrest me." It's consistent with your Substack post on cluster B disorders. So I thought we'd put it out this weekend.
Well, I bet you had a lot of that in the UK now with all the demonstrations, no?
Yeah. They're over, as your Substack article noted. They are very substantially. They're not completely, but very substantially female, and it's basically anything they can be upset about and show off about. And you notice the markers, the aposematism, the brightly coloured hair, the tattoos, the general screaming and unhappiness. And it has to be focused into something that they can make themselves feel kind of morally righteous about. And it can be Palestine. Also, it can be at the moment these migrant hotels. So you have people being very, very upset as they have distributed these illegal, almost always male immigrants from the Middle East around the country, including in hotels in rural towns. And they are at best sitting in parks and, looking at the kids and things, ogling little girls, and at worst, of course, raping them and attempting to rape them. And what do we have in these areas whenever the locals engage in some protest against these men being housed in one of these hotels? You have a bunch of women, and it is mainly women, calling themselves Stand Up to Racism, going there in a crowd and shouting at the members of the public that they are racist and they are Nazis and so on. And some of them have had to, a lot now, increasingly, they're having to be defended by groups of police against the hostile crowd. And in Nuneaton yesterday, that is to say Saturday, a group of them, again, mainly women, some males, were just literally chased out of town. I mean, chased out of town by a hostile crowd shouting paedophile at them. So it's very, very unpleasant and tense. And it is precisely those kinds of women, young middle-class women, who are therefore probably, perhaps even by virtue of being middle class, elevated in social anxiety, because there's some evidence of a weak correlation between neuroticism and doing well in education. Yes. And them just standing there screaming that everyone's racist, and people reacting in a way they're not used to. They're not used to it, and they're not used to getting a reaction from the public. Normally they get to virtue signal and then nothing happens, other than that they can feel good. But now they're getting a negative response. And I could see them stunned by this.
Oh, really? But isn't that really what not that this is going to be the topic of the day, but isn't that secretly what they want? Because there's an element of masochism in it?
Yes, I think that's a very good point. Very possibly, yes. I don't mean to be No, I do mean to be reductionist about it. And one of the theories that has struck me the most is the studies indicating that that there is a very weak correlation, as sort of 0.2, that it is there, and it creates a bell curve outlier effect, obviously, of feminist identification correlating with rape fantasies, and which I think makes quite a lot of sense, because if you're basically a fast life history strategist that's born to live fast and die young, then the only way you can know a man is the dominant kind of man, and thus has the genes that are worth passing on, is that he can dominate you.
But then our talk on the Jolly Heretic will have been very topical, and you should all go and have a listen.
Yes, it will be very topical.
Let's move on to the topic of the day, which is, I'm very interested to hear about your new research. But first, for those who don't know you, could you quickly just talk about your background and how you came to research the topic you're now on about the Quakers in the 17th century?
Oh, well, we could talk about that, or it really just crosses over with wokeness. But I started off doing theology. I did a theology degree, and then from there I was very interested in fundamentalism and in why people become fundamentalist Christians and why they join kind of unusual, religiously extreme sects. And so that's what I did my doctorate on. Sort of anthropological fieldwork, essentially. And then from there, I started to realize that what you're told about, if you do a degree, let's say theology degree or social science degree, that it's not genetically informed at all. And I then started researching the Finns and why I moved to Finland and I became fascinated by why the Finns sort of different. Why is it that you think the Finns are just going to be like the Norwegians? But they're not. They're quite marked.
They're really not.
No, they're not.
They're really not.
No, well, the example, I had this girlfriend when I was an undergraduate in my third year, and she was Norwegian. And I went to Norway to stay with her at a farm in a place called Lillestrøm, I think it was called. And
Lillestrøm.
Yes.
Yeah.
And now, people on the plane were Norwegian. So this is 2002. They spoke English, and they were friendly. And it was an hour and a half flight, and I chatted away to some guy who was a butcher or something in Oslo, but spoke fluent English. And so then a year later, I didn't collect like Nordic types, but I then happened to have a Finnish girlfriend, who is now my wife. And I was anticipating the same thing, but this time it was a 3-hour flight. So I got on the plane, and I was aware of how quiet it was. Getting on the plane with the Norwegian people, that was the same as getting on a British plane, sort of, or middle-class British plane. Right? No, this was very quiet. And then I sat down, and I hadn't brought anything to do, because I anticipated a conversation with a friendly Finn, throughout the flight. So, do you speak English?
Couldn't find one.
Do you speak English? A little. And they had glasses. And they have these different noses from ours where they kind of stick up so you can see the nostrils straight up like a pig's snout. And I was like, this is not going well. And they absolutely weren't talkative. They did not want to have a conversation. So fortunately you had the in-flight magazine in those days. So I just read the in-flight magazine, and then was just bored.
Oh my God, how unfortunate!
And then I got there, and then it's no one spoke English back then. English in Finland in those days, nobody spoke English. And in Norway, when I'd been there the previous year, everybody spoke English. And they were so kind of introverted and so different. But anyway, I became fascinated by this. Why was this the case? Why are they different? And I did this field work about it, where I sort of thought, in some ways, they're a bit like the Greenlandic. And I found out a number of comparisons to that, and I called the book The Finnuit. But then the problem was that there were a number of questions that were left unanswered, and that they left unanswered. And I realized it's because nobody was talking about the genetics. And I started looking into the personality and the heritability, genetic component of personality and other things, and intelligence as well. And then I started to realize what was going on, which was that they were genetically different. And then this opened up everything. Then suddenly this information that I had been hidden from me because I'd gone down the humanities route, because frankly, I think science is just badly taught. So I dropped science at school as soon as I could. I did quite well in it, but I didn't like it. And so at 16, you do your A levels. You do 11 subjects at 16. Science is compulsory, maths is compulsory, and then you do 3 subjects. You focus in, and I focused English literature, history, Christian theology, complete, no science, no maths, no statistics, gone, boom. And of course, then I realised the mistake I'd made, or rather the mistake that we have built into the education system in our country. And so then suddenly I became interested I gradually became interested in intelligence and things like this, and the genetics of things like religion. And then I got to know Richard Lynn, and he's dead now, but he was an eminent and very controversial psychologist that researched things like race differences and IQ, things like that. And then started working for him. And then it gradually developed from there. But I've always remained very interested in religion and the psychology of religion and that kind of thing. And so most recently, I'd done a book called Woke Eugenics, How Social Justice is a Mask for Social Darwinism, where I basically look at wokeness as a kind of a selection event, whereby basically due to industrial revolution and whatever, we become so unbelievably genetically unhealthy. Child mortality collapses from 35-40% to 1%, build of mutation. Mutation is associated with what we were selecting against under harsh conditions. So being genetically healthy is associated with religiousness, conservatism, being group-oriented, that sort of
thing. Wait. Can you go? That was very interesting. Can we do that in a little bit more detail?
Sure. So what we looked at in the book, is the idea that we were under harsh Darwinian selection of about, it varies according to when in history, but something like 40% child mortality until about 1800. And then, of course, the innovation, and we know that there was essentially a fitness factor that was under selection, that was being selected for. So we know we were selecting for intelligence. We've got ancient genomes where we can track this with polymorphisms that are associated with intelligence. So we were selecting for intelligence, we were becoming more intelligent across time. We were selecting obviously for physical health, particularly as you get towards the Maunder minimum, because it's so cold and group selection, battles, whatever, it's so intense. So, I mean, in about 1698, 1/2 of the population of Finland were killed in a huge famine in that year, 1698. That's how tense things were at that time. And so, and we know we were selecting for that. We were selecting for religiosity. Religiosity has all of the components of an adaptation. It is a cognitive bias that hits in at times of stress. It is associated with being pro-social. It is associated with being group-oriented. If you stimulate the anterior frontal cortex with magnets, you become both more religious and more ethnocentric. It is associated with being with fertility. It is associated with mental health genetically. It is associated with physical health genetically. It's a genetic relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So you have.
But hold on, the prefrontal cortex. That's also where you find differences in conscientiousness.
Exactly,
which is also linked to
which religious people are higher in. So you've got this fitness factor. So as Darwinian selection pressures collapse, then what you would expect is a deviation from this fitness factor. A huge build-up of mutation in the population should happen. And we see this. And we have a lot of evidence that this is going on, that there's a crumbling genome. Now, if that goes on forever, then eventually the species is so unfit that when the civilization collapses and there's harsher conditions, or when there's the next sort of Graham Hancock selection event where we get hit by a meteorite or something, right? Then
I love that show. It's an ongoing dispute in our household where I just love that show, and my husband mocks me for it.
You mean the Netflix show? You mean
yes?
Yeah. Well, you're
the ancient apocalypse. It's aliens, and I always say he never said it was aliens. He never said it.
He didn't say.
I think it makes a lot of sense.
He didn't say. Well, my next book will be on that. I'm just finishing a book at the moment.
Really?
Yeah. Well, that or the Quakers, whichever one comes out first. But so Hannah, you see, we've got this situation where where if that happened, then we'd be wiped off the face of the earth. Anyone that was on the grid would be so unfit they'd be destroyed. And so all that would be left would be people on the Andaman Islands or whatever, and they'd remember us as gods, just like in Ancient Apocalypse talks about. So something has to click in, something has to happen, because we also know, by the way, that we build up, Darwinian selection collapses, we start to become less healthy, we also start to become less intelligent, and we know that we're losing about 1 point per decade. And it's on the most genetic components of the IQ test. So we're getting stupider and
But
stupider.
hold on, I thought we were getting smarter because we have better nutrition.
No.
No?
That's no. Well, no. There's two things there. There's the we're going to get knocked off the path here, but there's the Flynn effect. You see, so intelligence is a bit like a pyramid. At the base of the pyramid, there's narrow specialized abilities like catching a ball or driving a car or spotting patterns or something like that, right? And then they can be factor analyzed into three key forms of intelligence: verbal, mathematical, spatial, and they themselves intercorrelate into what we call G, general intelligence. Now, what you do with the IQ test is you give people a series of tests that measure different components of intelligence, and you average out the result, and that's their IQ score. Now, some of these tests are more G-loaded, i.e. they're better measures of intelligence. Some of them are worse measures of intelligence. Now, what happens with the Flynn effect was that since about 1930, it's noticed that with every new cohort, the IQ score goes up. But it's not going up on the more G-loaded components of the IQ battery, and it's not going up on G. It's going up on these specialized abilities, particularly pattern spotting. And it goes up so much that it overwhelms everything else that's happening, i.e. the evidence that intelligence is actually going down across time, and it comes across as a secular increase. Because the society is becoming more scientific, it's forcing people to think in a more kind of scientific way. Would be more educated, things like that. Nutrition may play a role, but there's not much evidence that it's that good of a role, because if that were the case, then the IQ of the Dutch or whatever that starved severely during World War II would have collapsed in the subsequent generation, but it didn't. So it seems to be that the key environmental component to intelligence is an intellectually stimulating environment, which is why the heritability of intelligence in childhood is low, but in adulthood is high, because in adulthood you're creating your own environment consistent with your own innate intellectual ability, whereas in childhood it's your parents or your teachers that are creating the environment, so it reflects their ability. So anyway, what happened? We're pushing us to our phenotypic maximum on these specialized abilities at the base of the intelligence pyramid, and because of the imperfect nature of the IQ test, it comes across as an IQ rise, but that's not an intelligence rise; it's an IQ rise. And what that means then eventually is we would reach the phenotypic maximum, and when that was reached, we would start to see an IQ decline, and that on the IQ tests. And that would be on the more G-loaded, which are also the more genetic, the more heritable IQ test batteries, and that's exactly what happened. And this first happened with the cohort born in 1980. In Finland, anyway, the IQ scores start to go down. So now we have a negative Flynn effect. But on all other measures, IQ intelligence correlates like reaction times, for example, have been getting longer since 1880. And they are consistent with a loss of about 15 IQ points, and they correlate with IQ or choice reaction times at about 0.3 negatively. And there's many other examples of this, but it's going down. We actually have genetic data from Iceland showing that across 3 generations, the prevalence of alleles associated with educational attainment among the Icelandic has declined because there's a negative correlation among women.
Yes, well, the Icelandic does have a lot of intermarriage.
You mean? Well, they have an app to try and help you not have that problem.
Yeah, they do. They do, which is brilliant. Okay, no, I was just joking. But this is on a global. This is on a global scale. Or
Yeah,
is it
well, I mean,
just in Finland we're
there's
talking about?
nuances to this, but it's sort of
Yeah.
there's variation, but kind of. But anyway, the point,
Yeah.
the point
We're
is
talking globally.
fitness factor.
Particularly.
The fitness factor. Intelligence is a little bit different because intelligence is associated with social conformity. So in a left-wing society, intelligent people will tend to be left-wing. In a right-wing society, right-wing. But basically, this fitness factor is being selected against. And if this carries on, then we're just so deracinated. Nobody wants to have children, and and everyone's sick, and we'll die out. But brilliantly, wokeness has manifested, and so what you have with wokeness is, as I said, being left wing, being an atheist. All of this stuff is associated with mental illness, with physical illness, and with markers of mutation. Left wing men are shorter. Left wing women are uglier and their faces are less symmetrical. Left-wing people are less likely to get over cancer. Left-wing people have more diseases of a genetic nature. There's all
Right.
kinds of stuff on this.
But this left-wing women are uglier. How much do you think that has to do with just with hygiene and the trend of feminist
No,
the fashion making you?
no. I mean, it's facial symmetry.
Yeah, that's the Danish study, right? Where they picked out the
No,
politicians
no, 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 no.
from their facial
There was a
features.
Danish study. There was somebody called Bjerregaard, I think his name was, and
Mm,
there have been other studies that have replicated it.
right,
Um,
and that had nothing to do with how they looked, how uh,
no,
electively,
you
how
measure
they chose to look.
the symmetry of the
Yeah.
face. Um,
Hmm.
so anyway, so what happens then is that it seems to us in woke eugenics is that at a certain point, the percentage of the population, what's happening is you've got a society that's increasingly genetically maladaptive, but a culture that has manifested back when it was adaptive and is pushing people along an adaptive roadmap of life. And is saying, boys be boys, girls be girls, have children, lay down your life for your country, adaptive things. At a certain point, it seems that, at least among Europeans, the percent seems to be 20% or so. When things are changing, the up and coming people, the new Turks, once they get to about 20, the young Turks, once they get to about 20%, they are seen as the up and coming thing, as the future. And people flip over very quickly. They switch very quickly to the new way of doing things. And that was to be left wing. And that happened in England and America, I think, in the 60s. I mean, essentially, we can reduce it down to moral foundations. We have 5 moral foundations. We have group-oriented foundations because we are a pack species, in-group loyalty, obedience to authority, sanctity versus disgust. And we have individually oriented foundations because we have to get to the top of the pack to pass on our genes historically. That is to say, equality and harm avoidance. And left-wing people are about the same. Right-wing people are about the same in all 5 moral foundations, and left-wing people are only interested in the individually oriented ones, which makes sense because they're high in mental illness and they're high in physical illness, and so they're like girls, really. So how are you going to play for status? You play for status covertly via virtue signaling. It seems that we flip over in favor of individualism in about the 60s. And then, of course, you get runaway individualism. Intelligent people notice that the way the wind is blowing is individualism. They adopt individualism, and you get runaway individualism, runaway concern with equality, runaway concern with harm avoidance, until you can't even tell a deluded person that is a man, but is sexually aroused by the idea that he's a woman, that he is a man. You can't even do that. So that happens. Now, what that does is it pushes people on a maladaptive roadmap of life. Suddenly, society is saying to children, it's okay to be gay. It's good to be gay. It's good to be trans. Be guilty for being white. Be guilty for being a man. Be guilty for being human. Go on climate strike and in your most fertile years and don't have babies. Be like a man if you're a woman. Be like a woman if you're a man. Be proud to be fat. Don't try and lose weight. Be proud to be unhealthy. Abort your offspring. Euthanize yourself. Have mass immigration to make you depressed and unhappy and to reduce your genetic interest and elevate the likelihood of you being raped. Be very concerned with material things, such that you say to yourself, oh, I won't have children, so I can have a high material lifestyle. What else? All of this kind of stuff, which only certain people, who's going to be resistant to this onslaught? What it means is that the majority of people, unhealthy people, who are genetically prone to be slightly left-wing, will be sucked into this death cult and not pass on their genes. And the only people that will be resistant to this will be people that offer, will be two kinds of people: stupid people who just instinctively have babies and have sex. And among the more intelligent, it's going to be those that are religious and conservative. And we've proven that in the data. Once you control for intelligence, the big predictor of fertility, intelligence is like 80% genetic. Once you control for intelligence, the big predictor of fertility is conservatism, maybe 60%, 50% genetic, and religiosity, which is up to 70% genetic. And so they become the surviving population. The population renders itself healthy again. In addition, what these left-wing people push for is the collapse of society. That they are, by encouraging intelligent women to suppress their fertility, by having massive welfare programs to help low IQ people have kids, they're forcing down the intelligence of society. They're collapsing society back to a harsher level, under which people like them will die. So, and also, I suppose, they're kind of creating what I call neo-Byzantiums that Rome didn't.
What is that?
Well, Rome didn't collapse completely. Rome shrank. Civilization shrank, and it held out in a kind of neo-Byzantium. Byzantium, where it kind of held out in a diminished form. And you'd expect the same thing to happen again. Basically, low IQ European people, they tend to miscegenate. That's the big predictor that you will absorb yourself into the non-European population, is that you are of low intelligence. So they remove themselves, and so what you end up with is a reasonably intelligent, ethnocentric, religious. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I mean, it will be like, like in parts of Norway, you go to Kristiansand, you have these fundamentalists, right? That's what it will be like. Yeah, it won't be fun, but these.
I was just in Kristiansand last week, actually. It was quite nice.
It's
They're
nice.
very
It's
pro-Israel and very, they commented on my son and came over and said, he's wearing a kippah. We are on your side. And so I quite enjoyed Kristiansand, just going to say.
Well, yes, there is the fetishization of the Jews among Pentecostal Christians. That is certainly true. So it would be kind of like that, I suspect. But that's what will happen. That civilization, and indeed thus the relevant genetic health, retreats, and all around is chaos and war and destruction and death. And another dimension to this that makes me wonder if it's almost like accelerationism. If you're familiar with Ted Kaczynski and that kind of idea of, it's almost unconsciously one thinks woke is accelerating this. So if it wasn't for woke, it would be like boiling a frog. The things would slowly get worse, very gradually, and would there ever be a reason to react? But and break away and create your neo-Byzantium and preserve yourself. But that's not what woke does. Woke accelerates it hugely by doing everything it can to really, really annoy and upset anyone that's remotely conservative, and to make them feel like an outcast, and to make them feel like they're worthless and they're scum, and to just really piss them off and make them feel terrible. And of course, the result of that, and with the internet as well, is that people like that find each other in a way they wouldn't previously have done, create para-societies in a way they wouldn't previously have done, create a kind of para-academia. I mean, even have sex with each other more. Like if you
the woke you're talking about.
If the woke run the culture and they say you're terribly bad because you're right wing, you're an evil person. And you in the old days when it wasn't so polarized, life was, you just sort of find someone that you got on with, and when you're in your 20s and you marry them and have babies, and they wouldn't necessarily be that genetically similar to you. But now with the polarization, right-wing people and left-wing people are separating into gradually.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Particularly among the young, and therefore you're more likely to have a person that is genetically similar to you in terms of political views, and thus children that are likewise. So they're kind of creating.
But hold on. I have a question here, because you said para-academia, but the left controls academia.
Yeah, but then you're getting but you're getting that's a current situation. But if we go back to, I don't know, mid-Victorian England, academia was controlled by in sense of the university. Was controlled by the Anglican Church. It was basically a finishing school for the upper class and for Anglicans, and you had therefore dissenting academies where you didn't have to be Anglican, and they did some of the best research. I mean, oxygen was discovered at dissenting academy. You had gentlemen scholars like Charles Darwin or Francis Galton, and you had just enthusiastic amateurs, and a lot of them were sort of Church of England vicars actually, so academia didn't do the important stuff. That stuff happened outside academia, and it's the same as happening now. If you're going to behave like this, then the genius type, who is inherently a kind of a high intelligence sub-psychopath who can't get on in the girl world of academia, will just go outside of it and do things there. So my point is, I mean, look at Substack. Substack permits this to happen. So, and then you just get people who will fund these effectively de facto gentlemen scholars. This is what is going on. And so, so my point is that that's what it does. It accelerates it. Wokeness accelerates the conflict, accelerates the breakup, accelerates the creation of Neo-Byzantiums. So they get created while we're still genetically healthy enough to do so.
Yes. And that needs to happen before we are completely taken over by Islam. That concludes the free episode of Psychobabble. Thank you so much for listening. Here's a preview of the members exclusive segment.
Argue it's in their interests to have, if you're a ghastly, ugly woman who is competing against, which they are on average, who is competing against good-looking, attractive women, it's in your interests there to be an excess of men. You are more likely to get a man if there's loads of men, because then you have inter-male competition, and so you're more likely to get a bloke. So obviously it's in your interests to import loads of men. Do you think if the shoe was on the other foot, we wouldn't import lots of fit young Ukrainian girls into our countries?
If you're not joining us there, have a very nice day, and I'll see you next time.